The hallway was full of people, but somehow, in that moment, it felt like the whole world had shrunk down to one man crouched over a mop, one woman with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass, and a joke that everybody nearby was very, very happy to laugh along with. Xiomara stood beside her desk with a juice pack in her perfectly manicured hand, watching the cleaner bend down to wipe the floor she had just dirtied. Her friend Florencia was already pressed against the wall beside her, shoulders shaking, trying to hold it together. No, wait. Xiomara held up one finger like she needed everyone to pause so she could finish her thought. Look at him. Just look. Florencia bit her lip. Xiomara, I'm being serious right now. Xiomara cocked her head to the side, studying the cleaner the way someone studies a painting they find genuinely confusing. You're actually handsome. You know that? Like, good face, nice jaw, broad shoulders, the whole package. She gestured up and down at him like she was narrating an auction. And this is what you're doing with it? Florencia lost it. Full, loud, hand-over-mouth laughter, cleaning up the juice I spilled. Xiomara laughed too now, shaking her head slowly. I mean, honestly, it's a little sad. The cleaner said nothing. He just kept working, which, somehow, made everything worse. You clumsy fool, Xiomara said louder this time. Loud enough that two people passing in the hallway slowed down to look. She pointed at the small puddle spreading near her heel, the same puddle she had knocked over herself and hadn't even pretended was an accident. Look at this mess. Some of us are trying to walk here. Is this seriously the best you can do? I'm sorry, Ma. His voice was low and even, completely unbothered. That made Florencia laugh harder. All this face, Xiomara continued, spreading her arms wide like she was addressing an audience. And you're out here mopping floors. Some people are just born to sit in offices, you know? And some people, she gestured down at him with a light, dismissive wave. Some people are just born to carry buckets. More laughter. A few nearby workers exchanged glances. Some smiled awkwardly. Some looked away. The cleaner straightened up slowly. He turned and looked directly at Xiomara for exactly 1 second. Just one. With a pair of dark, deep-set, utterly calm eyes. No anger. No embarrassment. Not even a surprise. Just calm. Like a man who already knew something she didn't. Then he looked back down, dipped his mop, and kept working. And right there, in that one quiet, unbothered second, was everything. Because what Xiomara did not know, standing there in her designer dress with her friend folded over in laughter beside her, was this. The man she had just called a clumsy fool in front of half the floor, he was the reason she had a job. His name was Dante Williams. 29 years old, the only son of Vivian Williams, the founder, chairwoman, and CEO of Williams Property Group, the most powerful black-owned real estate empire in Houston, Texas. The company that paid Xiomara's salary, the company that owned the very building she was standing in. And Dante had been pushing that mop through these hallways on purpose. Now here's the thing. This story is so much bigger than a rich man playing dress-up. This is about a billion-dollar empire, a mother who saw around every corner before anyone else thought to look. A loyal right-hand man who helped engineer one of the cleanest corporate stings this city has ever seen. And 3 women whose true characters were exposed under the quiet, merciless pressure of a mop and a bucket. One of them would walk away with everything. 2 of them would walk away with nothing but shame. And the most gut-wrenching part? The woman who won, the one who passed every single test, had absolutely no idea there was even a test to begin with. But to understand how Dante Williams ended up in a faded uniform, mopping floors in his own mother's company, we need to go back. Back to Houston. Back to a quiet evening in a house in River Oaks, where a mother and her son made a plan that nobody in that office ever saw coming. Now, River Oaks, Houston, was the kind of neighborhood where even the silence felt expensive. The streets were wide and lined with old oak trees so broad their branches reached over the road and almost touched from both sides. Every house sat back from the curb behind iron gates and long driveways, each one telling the world in its own quiet, certain language. Whatever lives behind these walls costs something real. Vivian Williams' home sat at the end of a curved private driveway, with warm amber light spilling from every window into the night air. It was a 3-story colonial house, cream walls, tall dark-framed windows, and a front door that was heavy and serious and built like a statement. The kind of house that didn't whisper I'm wealthy. It said I built this. Because she had. Every single room, every single floor, every single brick. Inside, in the wide, high-ceilinged living room, mother and son sat across from each other on opposite sofas. A glass of water rested on the coffee table between them, completely untouched. Dante had showered, changed into a simple white shirt and dark trousers, and looked like everything a mother waits years for when her child is far away, whole, healthy, and home. But Vivian wasn't looking at him with just relief. She was looking at him with calculation and care and the kind of deliberate, quiet purpose that had run a company for 23 years. And Dante, who had grown up watching that exact expression from across dinner tables and boardrooms, recognized it the moment she settled into her seat. "You have something to say," Dante said, resting his elbows on his knees and meeting her eyes directly. "So say it." Vivian set her reading glasses down on the table and folded her hands. "You are back now," she began, her voice unhurried and certain. "And soon I want you to start coming into the company. Begin taking over some duties." "That was expected," Dante replied simply. "But there is another thing," she added, without missing a beat. Dante studied his mother's face for just a moment, and then a slow smile moved across his. "Marriage," he said. "Don't look at me like that," Vivian said flatly. "Mom," he laughed softly, leaning back against the cushions. "I literally just landed. I haven't even fully unpacked yet." "You can unpack and still listen," she replied, simply and completely, leaving absolutely no room for a counter-argument. Anyway, that right there was Vivian Williams in a single sentence. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply redirected quietly, calmly, and without any space left for debate. So Dante exhaled slowly, uncrossed his arms, and gave her his full attention. Because when his mother used that particular tone, the wisest thing a person could do was listen. "There are 3 women in this company," Vivian continued, her voice measured and deliberate. "I have been watching all 3 of them for months now. Their names are Isadora, Xiomara, and Lorenza." Dante blinked once. Three, she confirmed. "Mom," he tilted his head slowly, "am I choosing a wife or conducting a panel interview?" "Be serious," Vivian said. But the very corner of her mouth shifted, just barely, and Dante caught it. But then, and this is where the conversation took a completely different direction, Dante leaned forward and his expression shifted entirely. Because this wasn't a joke to him. Not really. He had been thinking about this the whole flight home. About what it truly meant to step into an empire this size. About what it meant to choose someone who would stand beside it. About what it meant to be the son of Vivian Williams, and to walk into a room where every single person would perform the moment they heard his name. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping low and deliberate. "What if they already know who I am?" Vivian looked at him steadily. "If I walk into that company as your son," Dante continued, "every person in that building will perform. They will smile at me. They will speak more carefully. They will adjust how they dress, how they act, how they carry themselves." He shook his head slowly. "Even the proudest ones will pretend. And I don't want to marry a performance. I want to marry a person." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant she was thinking, not waiting. "I want to enter that company as a cleaner," Dante said. The silence that followed was heavy and deliberate. "A cleaner," Vivian repeated. "Yes, you want to carry a mop and a bucket inside my company." "Yes, Mom." Vivian studied her son, this tall, brilliant, devastatingly handsome man she had raised alone through the hardest years of her life, and she thought, his father would have done the exact same thing. Then she said quietly, "You are truly your father's son." "Is that a yes?" Dante asked. "It is a careful yes," she replied. And then she picked up her phone from the side table. She dialed, and she said only 3 words into the phone. "Come to the house." 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. Now, Sergio Okafor was the kind of man who made other men instinctively straighten their posture when he walked into a room. He had been Vivian's operations manager for 7 years, which inside Williams' property group meant he was, in every practical sense, the spine of the entire operation. He was 6 feet tall and dark brown-skinned, with a clean, precisely shaped low fade and a jawline that looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. He was always clean-shaven, always pressed into a perfectly fitted suit, and he moved through every space with a settled, unhurried authority that told people everything they needed to know about who trusted him and how completely. He arrived at Vivian's home in under 15 minutes. Because when Vivian Williams called, people moved. He stepped into the living room, gave Vivian a respectful nod, and looked at Dante. "Good evening, Ma," he said. "Welcome back, sir." "Thank you," Dante replied, extending his hand. Vivian wasted no time. "My son wants to enter the company as a cleaner, Sergio," she said. "No one is to know who he is." Sergio turned and looked at Dante for a long, measured second. There was a flicker behind those steady eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something like quiet admiration. Then it was gone. "Understood, Ma," he said. "I'll handle it. You'll speak to Mr. Torres," Vivian continued. "He runs the cleaning team. Tell him Dante is a new temporary cleaner sent through management. Nothing more. He does not need to know who Dante is." "And if anyone recognizes him?" Sergio asked calmly. "They won't," Dante said. "I've been gone for 4 years. I'll keep my head down and my cap on." "What name do we use?" Sergio asked, already thinking ahead. "My own," Dante replied. "Dante, common enough." Sergio nodded once, stood, buttoned his jacket, and left as quietly and efficiently as he had arrived. And just like that, in one living room in River Oaks, over one quiet evening, the plan was set in motion. But the plan wasn't complete yet, because before Dante ever touched a single mop, Vivian had 3 very important conversations to have first. And what each of this woman would say in that office the following morning would tell Vivian everything she needed to know. The following morning, Vivian arrived at her office on the 43rd floor of the Williams Property Group Tower in the Galleria district, while most of the staff below were still commuting. Houston's skyline stretched through the floor-to-ceiling glass behind her desk. Glass and steel and early morning light rolling across the city like a slow wave. She stood at the window for one quiet moment, coffee in hand, thinking. Then she sat down. "Estelle," she said, without looking up from the documents already spread across her desk. Her secretary appeared in the doorway immediately, file pressed under one arm. Estelle was a slim woman in her late 40s with sharp, efficient eyes, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of posture that came from 15 years of working beside someone who never wasted a single second. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "Call Isadora Voss for me," Vivian said. "Tell her to come in now." "Right away, ma'am," Estelle replied, already turning on her heel before the sentence was finished. A few minutes later, there was a soft, unhurried knock at the office door. Now, Isadora Voss was 26 years old, and she had the kind of beauty that did not walk into a room announcing itself. Her skin was deep, warm brown, rich and smooth, like the earth after a long summer rain. She wore her natural hair in a neat twist-out that framed her face softly, thick, defined coils catching the morning light with a gentle shine. She had almond-shaped eyes and full lips and a quiet way of moving through a space that made you feel like she thought carefully before she spoke. Every single time. She was wearing a simple, well-fitted burgundy blouse and dark trousers, and she carried a small notepad pressed to her side. She looked like someone who had come prepared to work, not to impress. And that, I guess, was exactly who she was. She stepped in and closed the door gently behind her. "Good morning, ma'am," she said, her voice warm and measured. "Good morning, Isadora. Sit down, my dear," Vivian replied, gesturing to the chair across the desk. Isadora sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap and waited, not stiff, but not overly relaxed either. She had the natural posture of someone who genuinely respected the room they were sitting in. "Relax," Vivian said. "You are not in trouble." "Thank you, ma'am," Isadora replied, softening just slightly. Vivian studied her quietly for a moment. Then she spoke. "My son Dante will be returning to the company very soon," she began. "He has been abroad studying for some years, but he is back now, and it is time for him to begin building his life properly. I have been watching several members of this company carefully, and I would like him to meet a few people." She paused. "I have been watching you, Isadora. Your work, your conduct, the way you carry yourself in this building." Isadora blinked. "Me, ma'am?" "Yes, you," Vivian said. "You come early. You do your work without making noise about it. And I have noticed how you speak to people, not only the senior staff, but the cleaners, the security team, the interns. You treat them like they belong here. And that," she said quietly, "is not as common as it should be." "Thank you, ma'am. I truly appreciate that," Isadora replied, her voice quiet. "I am not forcing your hand," Vivian continued. "And I am not forcing my son's, but I would like you to meet him when the time comes. Nothing beyond that." Isadora was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Ma'am, I am really grateful, but I want to be honest with you." She took a small breath. "I don't want to start building expectations around someone I haven't met yet. Your son has his own heart. He may come back and feel nothing when he sees me, and I would rather wait for something real than go chasing something that only looks good from a distance." Vivian looked at her for a long, careful beat. "That," she said finally, "is either the wisest or the most honest answer I have heard in a very long time." "I hope I haven't spoken out of turn, ma'am," Isadora said, dropping her gaze briefly. "No," Vivian replied. "You have spoken well. Continue being exactly who you are. And please, do not share this conversation with anyone." "Of course, ma'am." "Thank you," Isadora said, and stood quietly and left. Vivian sat still after the door closed. She picked up her pen, and on the notepad beside her coffee cup, she wrote a single word. Just one, real. But then, the second knock came, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted the moment the door opened, and Xiomara stepped in. Xiomara Reyes was 28 years old, and she entered every room like she had rehearsed it beforehand. Her skin was caramel golden and flawless, luminous even under office lighting. Her hair was bone straight and pressed to absolute perfection, falling past her shoulders like drawn silk. She had sharp, high cheekbones, wide, dramatic eyes with thick lashes, and a smile already arranged on her face before she had fully crossed the threshold. The kind of smile that was never about warmth, but always about effect. She was genuinely and completely stunning, and she had known that since she was about 16 years old. It was, in every sense, her first and most trusted tool. "Good morning, Ma," she said brightly, lowering herself into the chair before she was fully invited to. "You look absolutely wonderful today." "Good morning, Xiomara. Thank you for coming," Vivian replied, her expression giving nothing away. Vivian gave her the same explanation she had given Isadora. Dante's return, his age, the possible meeting. And as she spoke, something lit up behind Xiomara's eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like calculation moving very fast behind a warm, carefully managed expression. "Ma," Xiomara said, pressing one hand to her chest, "I honestly don't even know what to say right now. I am so grateful. I promise you, I would never... I will be absolutely my best self when..." "Nothing has happened yet," Vivian cut in, gently but very firmly. "Yes, Ma. Of course, Ma," Xiomara said quickly, sitting up straighter. "I will simply be myself. And please," Vivian added, "do not share this with anyone in the company. I won't say a single word, Ma. I promise," Xiomara said, pressing both hands together as if sealing a sacred vow. She stood, thanked Vivian 3 more times, and walked to the door. But the moment that door clicked shut behind her and she was alone in the corridor, her posture changed. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. Her smile shifted from warm performance into something far more private and far more pleased. She had barely reached the elevator before she was already redecorating a corner office in her mind, already imagining staff greeting her with, "Good morning, ma'am," as she swept through the lobby. What happened next was entirely predictable to anyone who truly knew Xiomara Reyes, and completely surprising to anyone who thought they did. She pulled out her phone before the elevator doors even closed. The third knock was the softest of all. Lorenza Abate was 27 years old, and she was the kind of woman who made people lower their guard without ever realizing they had done it. Her skin was a warm, light honey brown. Her features were gentle and almost delicate. A small nose, quiet eyes, a mouth always hovering just on the edge of a polite smile. She wore a simple cream dress and low heels, her hair pulled back into a neat, low bun. She looked like trust. She looked like patience. She looked like exactly the kind of woman a mother would choose for her son without hesitation. And I guess that was precisely the whole idea. She listened to Vivian's explanation with her hands folded, nodding at every right moment, her expression carrying exactly the right level of gratitude. Not too excited, not too humble, just perfectly carefully placed. "I am truly honored, ma'am," Lorenza said when Vivian finished. "You have carried so much on your own for so many years. You deserve to see your son happy and settled, and I would be so grateful for any opportunity to meet him properly. Please do not mention this to anyone," Vivian said. "Never, ma'am," Lorenza replied, with the calm, practiced certainty of someone who had rehearsed exactly this kind of conversation many times alone. She stood, thanked Vivian with quiet grace, and left. And as the door clicked shut, Vivian removed her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose slowly, and sat very still. She had interviewed hundreds of people over 23 years in this business. She knew when someone meant what they said. And Lorenza? Lorenza had not said a single false word in that entire conversation, which was, she thought carefully, exactly what worried her. The quiet ones always need the most watching. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared Houston's skyline, Dante arrived at the Williams Property Group tower through the rear service entrance on the ground floor. He was completely unrecognizable. Gone was the white shirt. Gone were the Italian leather shoes. In their place was a faded pale blue cleaning uniform that hung just a little too loose across his broad, muscled frame. A dark face cap pulled low over those sharp, clean waves and rubber-soled work shoes that squeaked faintly against the tile floor with every step. He carried a mop, a bucket, a spray bottle, and a folded cloth tucked under one arm. And if you had seen him standing beside his mother's private car the evening before, you would not have believed, even for a second, that this was the same man. Sergio was already waiting near the service corridor, dressed in his usual sharp charcoal suit. He looked at Dante for a long, silent moment. Then he said quietly, You ready? Do I look poor enough? Dante replied. Sergio held his expression together by sheer force of will. Focus, he said flatly. A few minutes later, Mr. Torres arrived. He was a stocky man in his mid-50s, with a thick gray mustache, tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the firm, no-nonsense posture of someone who had kept a cleaning team running inside a building that never slowed down for longer than most of the current staff had been alive. He looked Dante up and down without ceremony. You've done this kind of work before? He asked. A little, sir, Dante replied. A little is not enough, Mr. Torres said bluntly. Every floor in this building must shine. Every surface, spotless. No shortcuts, no excuses. If a staff member asks you to clean something within your duties, you clean it, without attitude and without delay. You start with reception. Have it done before full staff arrival. He pointed toward the wide lobby ahead. Move. And just like that, the heir to $1 billion empire picked up his bucket, walked into that gleaming lobby, and got to work. The reception area was wide and polished, with high ceilings and a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass along one side letting in the pale early morning light. Dante had just finished mopping the center section and was working his way toward the left side of the floor when the glass entrance doors slid open and the first staff members began trickling in. He kept his head down and kept moving, and then Isadora walked through the door. She came in quickly, holding her handbag and a small lunch flask, clearly on her way straight to her desk. But she stopped the moment she noticed the gleaming, still wet tiles ahead of her. She looked down at the floor. Then she looked up at Dante. Good morning, she said pleasantly. Sorry. Let me wait just a little for it to dry. I don't want to mess up your work. Good morning, ma'am. You can come through, Dante replied, looking up at her. I'll wipe that side again for you. No, don't worry about it, she said easily, shifting her bag to her other shoulder. You just cleaned it. I can wait a minute. So she waited, standing just inside the entrance, completely unbothered. Not checking her watch, not sighing, not pulling out her phone, not making Dante feel, even for a second, like her time was more valuable than the work he was doing. When the floor had dried enough, she stepped across carefully, glanced back and said simply, Thank you. Take care of yourself today. Thank you, ma'am, Dante said, and she walked toward the elevator, and the doors slid closed behind her. And Dante stood there for half a second longer than he needed to, mop still in hand, processing what had just happened. Because that interaction, that small, completely ordinary 30-second interaction, had told him something about Isadora Voss that her entire HR file never could have. Hey, my people, hold on for just 1 second. Because Dante is about to have a very different kind of morning, and trust me, you are going to want to be here for it. If this story already has you picking sides, if you already know which one of these women gives you the ick and which one you are rooting for, subscribe to this channel right now, smash that like button, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. Are you already Team Isadora? Tell us right now. Okay, because those glass entrance doors just slid open again. And this time, the heels were louder. You heard Xiomara Reyes before you saw her. Her stilettos hit the lobby tile in a sharp, deliberate rhythm that announced her arrival the way some people use a trumpet. She came through the glass doors in a fitted coral dress, her silk-straight hair swinging, her designer bag hooked in the crook of one arm, moving like the whole reception area had been arranged and lit specifically for her entrance. Dante was mopping near the left edge of the floor, a freshly cleaned section, still slightly damp. He looked up. Good morning, ma'am, he said evenly. Please be careful. The floor is still a little. Excuse you, Xiomara said, not slowing down for even a half step. I was only letting you know the floor is wet, ma'am, Dante repeated, keeping his voice steady and his face neutral. She stopped. She turned and looked at him. Not the way you look at a person, but the way you look at something you nearly tripped over. And you decided this was the right time to mop? She said, tilting her head slowly. Right when people are walking in for the day? I was following the schedule, ma'am, he replied. Well, she exhaled the word like it carried actual weight. Then maybe your schedule needs adjusting. Some of us have actual work to get to. She turned and walked through his freshly mopped floor without another glance, her stilettos clicking deliberately against the tiles, leaving a trail of scuff marks across the very section he had just cleaned. Dante watched her disappear toward the elevator. Then he dipped his mop back into the bucket and started on that same section all over again. He said absolutely nothing, not a single word. But he had already seen everything he needed to see in those 40 seconds. Little did Xiomara know, the man she had just spoken to like a minor inconvenience was the same man with the power to end her career with a single conversation at dinner. But the morning still had one more character to reveal. And this one, Dante would discover, was more dangerous than the first. because at least with Xiomara you always knew exactly what was coming. She wore her pride openly, like an outfit. But this third woman? She hid her somewhere else entirely. About an hour later, Dante had moved from the lobby to the main corridor outside the administrative offices on the second floor. He was wiping down the glass panels near the stairwell when Lorenza came out of the admin office carrying a neat stack of files. At first, she walked straight past him, no greeting, no acknowledgement, not even a glance in his direction. But then, two senior managers appeared from around the far end of the corridor, deep in quiet conversation, and the moment Lorenza saw them, she stopped. She turned back toward Dante with a warm, open smile, like a light she had just switched on. "Well done," she said, nodding at the glass panels he had been cleaning. "You're doing a really great job. The whole corridor looks so much better." "Thank you, ma'am," Dante replied. "Hard work deserves to be recognized," she said warmly, loud enough for both managers to clearly hear as they passed behind her. One of them glanced over with an approving nod. "That's right," he said pleasantly. "Good morning, Lorenza." "Good morning, sir," she replied, turning to smile at him. And then, the absolute moment those managers rounded the corner and their footsteps faded, Lorenza's smile switched off. Completely, like a lamp unplugged from the wall, she looked at Dante's bucket, which was sitting close to her office doorway, and her expression flattened into something flat and businesslike and entirely different from the warmth of 30 seconds ago. "Move that bucket away from my doorway," she said quietly. "It makes the corridor look untidy." "Yes, ma'am. I'll move it right now," Dante said. "And in the future," she added, already turning back toward her office without looking at him, "try not to leave your equipment blocking people's entrances." The door closed with a soft, precise click. Dante stood in that corridor alone, holding his bucket, completely still. Because in the space of 40 seconds, he had just watched Lorenza Abate produce two entirely different versions of herself. And the one she saved for the audience, the warm, respectful, thoughtful one, was nothing at all like the one she kept for when nobody important was watching. Now here's the thing. Dante had come into this building expecting the test to take weeks. He had expected to learn things slowly, carefully, over many days of patient observation. But the truth about people, he was discovering, had a very particular habit of showing up much faster than anyone ever planned for. And he was barely through his first morning. By the time his shift ended that evening, Dante had cleaned 4 offices, wiped 2 sets of glass doors, emptied 11 dustbins, and mopped 3 separate corridors. But the most important work he had done all day had nothing to do with a mop or a bucket. He knew things now. He had seen things. And he carried that knowledge quietly as he made his way toward the service exit. He was almost at the door when he heard voices drifting from the slightly open door of the marketing office. And one of them was very familiar. He slowed down. Honestly, who does he think he is? Xiomara's voice came clearly through the gap, bright with irritation. She was talking to Florencia, her closest friend on that floor, and she was very clearly talking about him. "He's just a cleaner, Xiomara," Florencia replied with a light laugh. "Forget about him. That is not the point," Xiomara said firmly. "He looked directly at me, like he had something to say." "So?" Florencia replied. There was a brief pause. Then, slowly and deliberately, she said, "You know what you should do? Don't just tell him, show him, spill something. Make him clean it up. Let him know exactly what his place is in this building." The room went quiet. Dante stopped walking. He stood completely still in that corridor, one hand on the handle of his mop bucket, his jaw tightening slowly under the sculpted 5 o'clock shadow. He had heard every single word. He knew exactly what was coming. But there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Not without blowing the entire operation. Not without exposing himself. Not without destroying everything his mother and Sergio had carefully put together. So he straightened up. He tightened his grip on the bucket handle. And he walked out. But what Dante Williams did not know, what he could not have seen because he was already walking toward the exit, was that on the second floor, behind the glass wall of the administrative office, a light was still on. And Lorenza Abate was standing at her desk, staring at nothing in particular, with a small, unreadable expression on her face. She had been replaying the morning in her mind. The way the new cleaner had carried himself. The way he had never flinched. Not even when Xiomara had spoken to him like he was furniture. The way his eyes were too calm, too steady, too completely settled for a man who had just started a low-level temporary position in a building full of people who barely noticed him. She turned her desk lamp off slowly. There is something about this one, she thought, pulling her bag onto her shoulder and walking toward the door. Something that does not add up. And Lorenza Abate, with her soft voice, her gentle face, and her perfectly calculated patience, was exactly the kind of woman who, once she started pulling at a thread, never stopped until the whole thing came completely apart. So the question now was this. With Xiomara already planning her next move, and Lorenza already quietly asking the wrong questions about a man who was supposed to be invisible, how long could Dante Williams really keep this up before everything he had built in that faded uniform began to fall apart? By the third day, Dante Williams had learned the rhythms of that building, the way you learn the layout of a house you have lived in for years. Not by studying it, but simply by moving through it long enough that your feet know where to go before your mind does. He knew which elevator the senior managers preferred. He knew which corridor got the most foot traffic between 9 and 10 in the morning. He knew which office smelled like fresh coffee at 7:45, and which desk belonged to the person who ate lunch at their workstation and left crumbs every single time without fail. He had mopped every floor, wiped every glass panel, emptied every bin, and carried his bucket through every corner of that building with his face cap pulled low and his expression giving absolutely nothing away. But more importantly, he had been watching. Every single day. Carefully, quietly, and completely. And what he had seen so far was this. Isadora arrived early and left late, greeted every single person she passed in the corridor regardless of their title or position, and did her work with the kind of focused, unhurried energy that made it look almost effortless. Xiomara arrived like an event, managed her image more carefully than her actual responsibilities, and treated any interaction that didn't directly benefit her as an interruption. And Lorenza continued to fascinate and unsettle him in equal measure. She was kind in public and cold in private, and she was doing it so consistently and so seamlessly that Dante was almost convinced she didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. But then something happened on the morning of day 4 that removed every remaining doubt Dante had about at least one of those 3 women. And it happened exactly the way Florencia had planned it in that half-open office 2 evenings ago. Dante was wiping down the small refreshment table in the corridor outside the marketing department when Xiomara came out of her office holding a juice pack in one hand and her phone in the other, already in conversation with Florencia, who fell into step beside her like a shadow. He kept his head down and kept working, but he tracked them in his peripheral vision. Because 2 days ago he had stood outside that office and heard exactly what Florencia had suggested, and now every instinct in his body was awake and paying close attention. Xiomara slowed as she approached the table. Then she stopped right beside it, directly next to where Dante was working. She peeled open the top of the juice pack and took one small sip, and then, with the kind of casual, deliberate, entirely unconvincing carelessness that only works when you are performing for an audience, she knocked it sideways off the edge of the table. The juice hit the floor in a wide, spreading splash, catching the edge of Dante's shoe and fanning out across the tiles he had already cleaned twice that morning. Florencia's hand flew to her mouth. She pressed it there and made a sound that was supposed to be a gasp of concern but came out as a half-swallowed laugh instead. "Oh no," Xiomara said, looking down at the mess. But her voice had absolutely no remorse in it. None. It was flat and theatrical, like someone reading a line they had already read once before and found boring. She turned and looked at Dante slowly, from his rubber-soled shoes up to his face cap, with an expression that was many things, but sorry was not one of them. "Well," she said crisply, "look what happened. I can clean that up right now, ma'am," Dante replied, keeping his voice even. "Yes," Xiomara said, tilting her head with a slow, practiced deliberateness. "I would hope so. That is literally your job." Florencia exhaled a laugh through her nose. She stepped back slightly, like she was giving the scene more room to breathe. Dante crouched down and began wiping the floor. And that was the moment Xiomara decided that a man silently cleaning up her mess was somehow funnier with commentary. No, wait. She held up one finger in Florencia's direction, and her voice shifted into something lighter and more openly amused. "Look at him. Just look. Xiomara." Florencia started, but she was already laughing softly, pressing her shoulder against the wall. "I'm being completely serious right now," Xiomara continued, studying Dante the way someone studies a painting they find genuinely baffling. "You're actually handsome, you know that? Like, good face, nice jaw, broad shoulders." She moved her hand in a slow, evaluating gesture up and down in his direction, the whole picture. She shook her head slowly, almost theatrically disappointed. "And this is what you're doing with it?" Florencia laughed outright this time. A full, open, unguarded laugh. "Cleaning up juice I spilled," Xiomara continued, her voice dipping into something almost pitying. "I mean, honestly, it's a little sad, don't you think?" Dante said nothing. He kept working. He rinsed the cloth, wrung it out, and went back to the floor in smooth, methodical circles. And the fact that he did not react, That he did not flinch or flush or stumble over himself trying to respond seemed to genuinely confuse Xiomara for just a beat. Because most people, when Xiomara performed for them, gave her something back. Fear, embarrassment, nervous laughter, an apology that wasn't even called for. Dante gave her absolutely nothing. And something about that irritated her far more than she expected. "You clumsy fool," she said then. Louder this time, clipping each word cleanly, loud enough that two people passing at the far end of the corridor turned to look. She pointed down at the remaining wet patch near her heel. "Look at this mess. Some of us are actually trying to walk through here. Is this seriously the best you can do?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Dante replied. His voice was completely steady, low, and even, and completely, infuriatingly unbothered. Florencia laughed harder. "All this face," Xiomara continued, spreading her arms out slightly, fully committed to the performance now. "And you're out here mopping floors. Some people are just born to sit in offices, you know? And some people," she waved one hand downward, dismissive and light, "some people are just born to carry buckets." And then Dante did something that Xiomara hadn't expected. He straightened up slowly. He turned and looked directly at her, just for 1 second. One single, quiet, completely controlled second, with those dark, deep-set, unhurried eyes. No anger, no embarrassment, no attempt to defend himself or explain himself or shrink himself down to match the size of the moment she was trying to put him in. Just calm, deep, settled, entirely certain calm, like a man who already knew something she didn't. Then he looked back down at the floor, dipped his claw, and finished the job. Xiomara held his gaze for that 1 second and then looked away first, which wasn't something she was used to doing. She tossed her hair, linked arms with Florencia, and walked away down the corridor with her stilettos clicking their familiar sharp rhythm. But the laughter between them was slightly less easy now, slightly more forced, because even Florencia, who had helped plan the whole thing, had seen that look in the cleaner's eyes, and she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. But then, things shifted, because the person who had been walking toward the refreshment table from the opposite direction and had slowed down when she heard the word "clumsy fool" carried from the corridor had heard every single word. Isadora stopped. She stood very still for exactly 2 seconds, her lunch flask in one hand and a printed report in the other. She looked at the wet floor. She looked at Dante, still crouched with his cloth, and she looked at the direction in which Xiomara had just disappeared. And then she walked forward. "Dante," she said. He looked up. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, ma'am." "Thank you," he replied. Isadora was quiet for a moment. She glanced down the corridor where Xiomara had gone, and then she looked back at Dante and said, carefully and clearly, "Honest work does not make a person lesser. Anyone who tells you different is only showing you who they are, not who you are." Dante held her gaze. He genuinely did not know what to say to that. Because those words, said quietly, said plainly, said to a man she had known for 4 days and thought was a cleaner, in an empty corridor with absolutely no one around to applaud her for saying them, those words landed somewhere deep. "Thank you, ma'am," he said finally. "Don't thank me for the truth," Isadora replied simply, and walked on toward her desk. Dante stayed crouched on that floor for a moment longer than the job required. His jaw was set, and his hands were steady, and his expression was exactly the same controlled neutral it had been all morning. But something behind those dark eyes had shifted, and anyone who looked closely enough, not that anyone in that building was looking at him closely at all, would have seen it. Now here's the thing. Dante had come into this building with a mission, a clear, specific, carefully planned mission that his mother had designed and Sergio had executed, and which he had committed to with full understanding of what was at stake. He was not here to fall for anyone. He was not here to feel anything. He was here to watch, to observe, and to report back. That was the entire plan. And yet, anyway, let us not get ahead of things. Because while Dante was working through the corridors with his mop and his bucket and his thoughts, something else was happening on the upper floors. Something that Vivian Williams needed to know about. And something that, once it was reported back to her, confirmed everything she had quietly suspected since that third knock on her office door. Sergio Okafor was at his desk on the 39th floor when Lorenza knocked. She came in carrying a neat folder of documents which she placed on the corner of his desk with a polite, cooperative smile. "Good morning, sir," she said pleasantly. "The revised figures from admin for the quarterly property review. I thought I'd bring them directly to you to save time." "Thank you, Lorenza," Sergio replied, flipping the folder open and scanning the first page. "I'll review these before the afternoon meeting." "Of course, sir," She remained standing for a moment, which in itself was a calculated choice, because sitting uninvited would have looked presumptuous, but remaining standing gave her a reason to keep talking. "Sir, if I may." Sergio looked up. "I hope Madame Vivian is not too stressed with everything going on," Lorenza said carefully. "She carries so much." "She's well," Sergio replied simply, looking back down at the folder. "That is good to hear," Lorenza said. She smoothed the edge of her blazer with one hand and added, with the practiced lightness of someone trying to make a direct question sound like passing small talk, "I know her son is expected to join the company soon. Some of the staff have been wondering. I guess we just don't want to be caught off guard. Has he arrived yet?" Sergio placed the folder down. He looked at her very directly. "When Madam Williams has information she wants shared with staff," he said, his voice measured and completely unreadable, "she will share it. Focus on the quarterly figures, Lorenza. They need to be submitted by Thursday." Lorenza smiled. "Of course, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." She picked up her bag and walked out. Sergio watched the door close. Then he reached for his phone, sent one message to Vivian that read simply, "Lorenza Abate. Asking about the son, second time this week," and he set the phone face down on his desk and went back to the figures. That evening, Vivian read the message from the back seat of her car as her driver navigated through the tail end of Houston's evening traffic on Westheimer Road. She read it once, set the phone in her lap, and looked out the window at the city moving past. Then she typed back 2 words. "I see," because that was the thing about Lorenza Abate, Vivian thought. She never did anything without a reason. And the reason she kept circling back to the question of Dante's arrival, while smiling sweetly and framing it as general concern, was the same reason she had answered all the right questions in Vivienne's office with perfectly chosen words. She wasn't interested in Dante. She was interested in what Dante represented. And there was a very significant difference between those two things that Lorenza did not yet understand Vivian was completely capable of seeing. Meanwhile, downstairs, on a floor that none of the senior managers thought twice about, something quieter and far more significant was beginning to grow. It started with small things, because the important ones always do. Dante was rearranging chairs in the large conference room after a late meeting when Isadora came past the open door carrying a stack of printed documents. She saw him inside and stopped. "You're always still here when everyone's gone," she said from the doorway. "Last ones to arrive, last ones to leave," Dante replied, lifting 2 chairs back into place along the table. Isadora stepped inside and set her documents on the edge of the table. She began straightening the chairs on the opposite side, sliding them back into their neat, even positions without being asked. Dante looked up at her and said, "You don't have to do that, ma'am." "I know," she replied simply, and kept going. They worked in easy, comfortable silence for a few minutes, which, in its own way, said more about who Isadora was than any conversation could have. She was not helping him to be seen doing it. There was nobody watching. She just saw work that needed doing and did it. And somehow that was the most disarming thing she had done in 4 days. "Can I ask you something?" Dante said after a moment. "Go ahead," Isadora replied, tucking the last chair under the table. "Why do you greet the security men every morning?" he asked. "And the cleaners? The people most staff walk past without even looking at." Isadora considered the question for a second. "Because they're here before most people arrive, and still here after most people leave," she said. "And nobody thanks them for it. So I guess, I don't know. It just seems like the least anyone can do." "Most people don't think about it that way," Dante said. "Most people don't think about a lot of things," she replied without bitterness. "Just fact." Dante looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, not the way he had been looking at people all week, analytically, assessingly, with his emotions held completely back behind a controlled, neutral expression, but actually looked at the quiet steadiness in her face, at the way she had just spent 10 minutes helping a cleaner rearrange chairs in an empty conference room with the same natural ease with which she did everything else. Like doing the right thing simply never required a decision for her, like it was just who she was, running underneath every action, all the time, whether anyone was present to see it or not. He looked away before she could notice. "Get home safely," he said, picking up his bucket. "You too," she replied. And she walked out. Now, if you think Dante was keeping his feelings locked down like a professional, and I guess, to his credit, he mostly was, then I need you to understand what was happening on the other side of that building. Because Guilmara Reyes had moved on from the cleaner entirely. In fact, she had moved on so smoothly and so quickly that you would almost think the whole juice incident hadn't happened at all. Almost. What happened next, honestly, should not have surprised anyone who had been paying attention. Xiomara had turned her full and considerable attention to Sergio Okafor. It started, as her strategies always did, with something small and deniable. A cup of coffee, delivered to his office on a Tuesday morning with a warm smile and a I was making some for myself and thought you might need it too." Sergio had thanked her politely, and she had held the thanks for slightly longer than necessary before leaving. The next day was a compliment about his tie, a deep burgundy silk piece that was, I guess, genuinely a well-chosen tie. But that was beside the point. The day after that, she had laughed just a little too enthusiastically at a fairly unremarkable comment he made during a department briefing, and Florencia had had to look at the ceiling to avoid making eye contact with anyone. "Xiomara," Florencia said during their lunch break that same day, keeping her voice low and her eyes scanning the surrounding tables. "People are going to start talking." "People are already talking," Xiomara replied, stabbing at her salad with remarkable confidence. "The difference is that when I walk out of this company in Sergio's car, they'll be talking about the right things." "But what about Madam Williams' son?" Florencia pressed. "I thought that was the whole—" "Florencia," Xiomara set her fork down. "Madam Williams has not told me a single concrete thing. No date, no introduction, no nothing. Meanwhile, Sergio is right there. He runs this entire company on a daily basis. He has access to everything Madam Williams touches." She picked her fork back up. "I am not waiting for a man who may or may not show up. I am investing in the man who is already here." Florencia opened her mouth. "Don't," Xiomara said calmly. Florencia closed it again. But what Xiomara didn't know, and what Florencia would have told her if she'd been allowed to finish her sentence, was that Sergio Okafor had already noticed the coffee, the compliment, and the laughing. And Sergio, who had spent 7 years learning how to read people from one of the sharpest women in Houston's business community, had filed every single interaction quietly and efficiently and without reaction. He missed nothing. He said nothing. But he saw everything, and in the corner office on the 39th floor, he was already composing his report. Meanwhile, Lorenza had decided it was time to adjust her angle entirely. She had gotten nothing useful from Sergio, at least not directly. So she turned instead to where she thought the information might be traveling more freely. She turned to Isadora. It started at the staff kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon. Lorenza came in while Isadora was making tea, and instead of doing what she usually did, getting what she needed and leaving, she pulled out a chair and sat down at the small table beside the counter. "You look tired," Lorenza said sympathetically. Isadora glanced at her. "A little," she admitted. "Long week." "Tell me about it," Lorenza agreed, even though her own week had been, by any objective measure, extremely manageable. She folded her hands on the table and tilted her head slightly. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Sure," Isadora said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Do you know anything more about Madam Williams' son?" Lorenza asked, keeping her voice soft and conversational, like she was asking about the weather. "I know Madam spoke to you as well. I just wonder. I mean, has he come back yet? Has she said anything more specific?" Isadora looked at Lorenza for a moment over the rim of her mug, and something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not rudely, but in the small, precise way that very observant people shift when they notice something that doesn't quite add up. Because this was not the first time Lorenza had casually circled back to this particular topic, and Isadora, who noticed more than most people gave her credit for, had been keeping count. "I honestly don't know anything more than what Madam told me," Isadora said carefully. "And I think whatever she wants us to know, she'll tell us when she's ready." Lorenza smiled warmly. "Of course, you're absolutely right. I don't know why I keep wondering." She stood, rinsed her cup, and left the kitchen with a pleasant nod. Isadora watched her go. Then she turned back to her tea and thought, quietly and privately, that this is the third time she has asked me something about this in 5 days. She said nothing to anyone. But she held the thought. The following morning, something happened in the corridor outside the accounts department that drew half the floor into the hallway without them even meaning to be there. A junior staff member, a young intern named Kaio, barely 3 weeks into his first corporate job, still carrying himself with the cautious, wide-eyed energy of someone who genuinely wasn't sure where anything was yet, came out of the records room carrying a tall stack of files and turned directly into Xiomara's path. They collided. The files went everywhere, and a paper cup of tea that Xiomara had been holding in her other hand went with them, splashing hot across the front of her blouse, hitting the floor in a wide, dark splash, soaking straight through the paper and into the carpet runner along the wall. Kaio's face went white. "I am so sorry, ma'am," he said immediately, dropping to his knees and grabbing at the scattered files. "I didn't see you, I'm so sorry." "Are you serious right now?" Xiomara's voice came out like a blade. She looked down at her blouse, at the spreading wet stain, and then at Kaio on his knees on the floor, and something in her expression went past frustration and into something much harder. "Are you actually serious? I'm so sorry, ma'am, please." "Do you have eyes?" she snapped. "Are they working? Because this is a designer blouse and you've completely—" She stopped, took a breath, And then, with controlled, deliberate coldness, she turned and called down the corridor, "Cleaner!" Dante was at the far end of the hallway. He heard it and came. "Clean this floor," Xiomara said flatly, not looking at him. Then she looked back down at Ko, who was still collecting files from the floor with trembling hands. "And you, get out of my sight. I don't even want to look at you right now." "Ma'am, please," Ko started. "I said move," she said, low and sharp and final. Ko gathered the last of the files and practically fled down the corridor, his face burning red. A few staff members who had stepped into the hallway at the sound of the commotion stood and watched in silence. And that silence, that collective, uncomfortable stillness, was the moment Isadora came out of the accounts office with her folder pressed against her chest and looked at the scene in front of her. She took it in. The wet floor, Ko's retreating figure, Dante already crouched with his cloth, and Xiomara standing with her arms folded, stained blouse and all, radiating righteous fury in every direction. "Xiomara," Isadora said. Her voice was calm and clear, not raised, but not soft either. "Don't," Xiomara said immediately, turning to look at her. "He is an intern," Isadora said evenly. "It was an accident." "It was carelessness," Xiomara replied. "It was an accident," Isadora repeated, with the same steady calm. "And the way you just spoke to him was not okay." Xiomara's eyes narrowed. "Who asked you, Isadora?" "Nobody," Isadora replied honestly. "But someone needed to say it." The hallway was very quiet for a moment. A few people looked between the two women. Nobody moved. Xiomara looked at Isadora with an expression that was three things at once: irritated, exposed, and genuinely caught off guard. Because Isadora had not said it to perform for the crowd. She had not raised her voice to make herself look good. She had just said it, simply, directly, and without caring about the aftermath. And that was the part that Xiomara had absolutely no prepared response for. "You should focus on your own work," Xiomara said finally, and walked away. Dante finished cleaning the floor in silence. He did not look up. But he had heard every word, and in his chest, behind the controlled, neutral, mop and bucket exterior he had been maintaining for nearly a week, something was growing. Something quiet and warm and entirely inconvenient for a man who was supposed to be conducting an undercover corporate investigation on behalf of his mother. Now here's the thing. If you are enjoying this story, if you have been sitting there picking sides and arguing with your screen and trying to figure out what Dante is going to do next, then stop everything for just 1 second. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment right now telling us who you think Dante should choose. Is it Isadora, genuine, steady, and completely unaware of how hard she is pulling at this man's heart? Or do you think Lorenza still has a card up her sleeve? Because trust me, she is not done yet, and things are about to get significantly more complicated. Welcome to the story. Now let's keep going, because what Dante didn't know, what he couldn't have known from his position down there on the floor, was that Lorenza had been watching the hallway scene from the far end of the corridor. She had watched Isadora step forward. She had watched the exchange. She had watched Dante the whole time, and unlike Xiomara, who had walked away annoyed, Lorenza had walked away thinking. That evening, Lorenza did something she had been considering for 2 days. She went to the cleaning storage room at the end of the east corridor, a small fluorescent-lit room with shelves of mops and sprays and folded clothes, and she knocked on the open door frame. Dante was restocking the supply shelf. He turned. "Dante," Lorenza said, her voice warm and unhurried. "Ma'am," he replied, turning back to the shelf. "You've been here nearly a week now," she said, stepping just inside the doorway. "I hope the work isn't too heavy. I'm managing fine." "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Good." She leaned one shoulder lightly against the doorframe. "Can I be honest with you?" He looked at her. "I worry about you sometimes," she said, dropping her voice into something softer. "Not because I pity you. Please don't think that. But because I see how some people in this building treat you. And it's not right." She paused. "Isadora is very kind to you. I've noticed. But," she tilted her head slightly, "I also wonder sometimes if she's doing it to make a point. You know how some people perform kindness, like it's a habit they want people to see." Dante looked at her steadily. "I think she's just kind, ma'am," he said simply. Lorenza smiled. The smile was warm and gentle and entirely unconvinced. "Maybe," she said. "I just would hate for you to mistake performance for reality. That's all." She straightened up. "Anyway, I'm here if you ever need a genuine conversation." "I mean that." She left. Dante stood in that supply room for a long moment after her footsteps faded down the corridor. He set the spray bottle he was holding down on the shelf very deliberately, and then he exhaled slowly through his nose. Because that That carefully delivered, gently framed, perfectly placed little seed of doubt she had just tried to plant was the most dangerous thing any of them had done since he walked through that service entrance. Xiomara used volume. She was loud and obvious and easy to read. But Lorenza used precision. She had just stood in a doorway and tried to make him doubt the one person in this building who had been nothing but real with him from day one. And she had done it with a warm voice and a sympathetic expression, an absolute plausible deniability if he ever repeated a single word of it. Lorenza Abate was not playing for today. She was playing for weeks from now. And that, Dante thought, as he picked up his bucket and walked out of that room, made her far more dangerous than anyone else in this building. That night, Vivienne's house in River Oaks was quiet and warm. Dante sat on the low couch in the living room with his face cap on the cushion beside him and his forearms resting on his knees. Vivienne sat across from him, reading glasses off, both hands folded in her lap, listening. Xiomara is chasing Sergio, Dante said. Vivienne's expression didn't change. I know, she said calmly. Sergio told me. Coffee, Thai compliments, and unnecessary laughter during team meetings. She's not subtle, Dante replied. No, Vivienne agreed simply. She never has been. What about Lorenza? Dante was quiet for a moment. She tried to make me doubt Isadora tonight, he said carefully. Told me Isadora's kindness might be a performance, that I might be mistaking it for something real. Vivienne studied her son's face very closely. And what do you think, she asked. Dante looked at his hands. I think Lorenza is the one performing, he said. And Isadora? Vivienne asked quietly. Dante was quiet for just a beat too long. And in that beat, in that single, unguarded half-second pause, Vivienne Williams, who had raised this man alone for 23 years and knew his face better than anyone alive, saw everything she needed to see. She did not smile, but her eyes softened in a way that was very close to it. Keep watching, she said simply. The test is not over. I know, Dante replied. But that was the problem. The test was supposed to be clinical and objective, and completely removed from personal feeling. It was supposed to be a corporate operation, a sting, a strategy. And for the first 6 days it had been exactly that. But now there was Isadora, steady, genuine, completely unaware, and Lorenza, calculating, dangerous, entirely aware of things she should not yet have been aware of. And tomorrow morning, Dante had to walk back into that building in his faded uniform and pretend that none of this was getting to him. So the question keeping him awake that night was not about the mission anymore. It was something much simpler and much harder all at once. How do you stay undercover in a building where someone is already getting through? And what happened the very next morning? What Lorenza had been quietly setting in motion, one conversation at a time, with the patience of someone who never rushed because they never needed to, was about to push the entire operation to a breaking point that nobody, not even Vivienne, had seen coming. The thing about a plan that is working exactly as designed is that the moment you start feeling comfortable, the moment the operation begins to feel routine and manageable and under control, that is precisely when everything decides to get complicated. And by the morning of day 8 inside Williams' property group, Dante Williams was beginning to feel something dangerously close to comfortable. Not with the mission, not with the undercover work, but with her, with the quiet way Isadora moved through that building, with the steadiness of her voice, with the completely unconscious way she made every space she occupied feel slightly more humane than it had been before she walked into it. And that, I guess, was the problem, because Lorenza Abate had spent the last 2 days watching. And what Lorenza saw when she watched Dante and Isadora, the small, careful exchanges, the way his pace slowed fractionally whenever he passed the accounts department, the way she always seemed to find a reason to linger just a moment longer in whatever corridor he was working in, was a thread. A real, useful, dangerously exposed thread. And Lorenza, who had spent the better part of 2 weeks being patient and methodical and quietly precise, had decided that this morning was the morning she was going to pull it. She arrived early, earlier than usual, and she went straight to the cleaning supply corridor on the 2nd floor, where she knew Dante would be restocking his cart before the floors opened for the day. She came holding a small paper bag from the coffee shop 2 blocks down. She knocked on the open door frame with one knuckle and leaned in with the warm, easy smile she kept specifically for moments when she needed something. "Good morning, Dante," she said. He looked up from the shelf. "Good morning, ma'am. I brought breakfast," she said, holding the bag up lightly. "Almond croissant. I always get 2, and I never finish the second one." So, she set it on the edge of the shelf beside him and stepped back, hands clasped in front of her. "You work too hard to start the morning on an empty stomach. That is very kind of you, ma'am." "Thank you," Dante said evenly. But then, and this was the part that told him everything about where she was going with this, she didn't leave. She stayed in the doorway. Weight shifted to one hip, in the relaxed, unhurried posture of someone settling in for a conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead, ma'am," Dante replied, continuing to stack the sprays on the shelf. Isadora. She said the name lightly, like she was just thinking out loud. "She's very warm with you. Has been since your first day." "She's warm with everyone," Dante replied simply. Lorenza tilted her head. "Is she? Or does she just seem that way?" She paused, like she was genuinely reflecting. "I've known Isadora for 2 years, Dante, and I can tell you, she is careful about who she spends energy on. So when I see her going out of her way for you specifically," she let that sit for just a beat, "I don't think it's nothing. I think she has a reason." Dante turned and looked at her directly this time. "What kind of reason?" he asked. "I don't know exactly," Lorenza said, dropping her voice just slightly, into something more confiding and less calculated, even though it was completely the opposite. "But I know that Madame Williams spoke to all 3 of us, and I know Isadora is smart enough to think about what impresses a woman like Madame. And what impresses a woman like Madame," she said deliberately, "is someone who is visibly kind to the lowest-ranked person in the building." She let that sit. Dante held her gaze for a long, quiet moment, and then he picked up the paper bag she had placed on the shelf, held it back out to her, and said calmly, "Keep your croissant, ma'am." "I'm fine." Lorenza's warm expression flickered. Just once. Just barely. But Dante caught it. The tiny, involuntary crack in the composure, before it sealed itself back over. "Of course," she said smoothly, taking the bag back. "I was just being honest." "I know," Dante replied, turning back to the shelf. She left, and the moment her footsteps faded down the corridor, Dante exhaled very slowly through his nose and set both hands flat on the shelf in front of him. Because Lorenza had just tried, for the second time in 3 days, to make him believe that the one genuine person in this entire building was performing, and the fact that she kept going back to that particular well, kept trying to poison that specific source, told him something very important about what she was actually afraid of. She wasn't trying to win Dante's trust. She was trying to destroy Isadora's. Now here's the thing. In a regular situation, that would have been merely manipulative. But in this situation, where Dante was supposed to be observing without feeling, assessing without connecting, watching without being moved, Lorenza's strategy was also, whether she knew it or not, accidentally confirming exactly how much ground Isadora had already covered. Because you don't work that hard to undermine someone who isn't already winning. That afternoon, the sky above Houston turned the particular heavy, greenish gray that Texans learned to read from childhood. The color that meant the weather was about to have a very strong opinion about your plans. By 4 o'clock, rain was hitting the office windows in wide, sweeping sheets, and the city outside the glass tower had blurred into moving lights and wet gray shapes. Most of the staff were still at their desks, waiting it out. Dante was finishing the last corridor on the 3rd floor when the door to the stairwell opened and Isadora stepped through it, holding a stack of folders against her chest and shaking a few drops of rain from her sleeve. She'd clearly gone down to the lobby for something and gotten caught in the edge of the weather near the entrance doors. She saw him and stopped, and then she laughed. Just a small, surprised, completely natural laugh, the kind that escapes before you decide to let it out. "Why are you always in every corridor I walk into?" she said. "I work here," Dante replied, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Technically, so do I," she replied, coming further down the corridor and setting her folders on the small side table near the window to reorganize them. The rain hammered against the glass beside her. She glanced out at it for a moment, and then back at him, and something in her expression settled into something more honest than the lightness of a second ago. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Go ahead," Dante replied, leaning his mop against the wall and giving her his full attention. She was quiet for a moment, straightening the folders without really looking at them. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said carefully, "about choices, and what matters, and what I actually want, not what makes sense on paper, not what looks right from the outside." She paused. "Does that sound strange?" "No," Dante said. "It sounds honest." She looked up at him then, and I guess the rain made the moment feel more enclosed, somehow. More private than a corporate corridor on a Thursday afternoon had any right to feel. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, directly, warmly, and without calculation, and said, "You never talk about yourself. In 8 days, I have told you about my mother, my neighborhood growing up, the reason I got into finance, and my complicated relationship with Mondays. And I still know almost nothing about you." Dante studied her face, and then he said, very quietly, "You know what matters." She looked at him for a moment. "What does that mean?" she asked softly. "It means," Dante said, "that who a person is, their patience, their honesty, how they treat people. That tells you more than a biography ever could. He paused. And what you know about me is real, even if it looks small. The rain kept going. The corridor was completely empty, and Isadora Voss looked at this man. This quiet, steady, completely unhurried man with the deep mahogany skin and the calm, dark eyes, and the faded uniform that fit a little too loose across shoulders that were built for something bigger, and felt something she had been trying, for 3 days, not to name out loud. "I like you," she said simply. The words came out calm and clear and entirely without drama, the way all of Isadora's most important statements did. Not because of anything I expect to come from it, not because of what it looks like or what it means for my position or what anybody else would think about it. I like you, Dante. Exactly as you are. The silence that followed was the warm, full kind, not the empty kind. "I like you too," Dante replied. And even those 4 words, in his low, even voice, carried more weight than 4 words had any right to carry. "Don't make it weird," she said quickly, which made him laugh. A real one. Not the controlled near smile he allowed himself most of the time. An actual, genuine laugh that changed his whole face and made Isadora's chest do something complicated. "Deal," he said. They stood in that rainy corridor for a moment longer. And then Isadora picked up her folders, tucked them under her arm, and said, "Get home before the rain decides to get worse." She walked to the stairwell door, pushed it open, and glanced back once. And the look she gave him before the door swung closed behind her was the kind of look that a man carries around with him for the rest of the day, whether he intends to or not. Dante stood in that empty corridor for a long, quiet moment. His mop was against the wall. The rain was loud against the glass. And in his chest, behind all the discipline and strategy and carefully maintained composure, something had shifted irrevocably into a place he could not shift it back from. He was falling for her. He was absolutely, inconveniently, and completely genuinely falling for Isadora Voss. And he had no idea what to do about it, because she thought he was a cleaner, and he was the reason she had a job, and his mother was watching all of it from 43 floors above him, and the mission was not over yet. But what happened next? What happened 2 mornings later, at 9:17 on a Saturday morning, from a call that Vivian Williams did not expect to receive, changed the entire shape of the operation in one single conversation. Vivian was at her home office desk when her phone rang. She picked it up and said, "Good morning, Estelle." But it wasn't Estelle. "Good morning, ma'am," said Isadora's voice, quiet, composed, but with the careful, deliberate weight of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say many times before dialing. Vivian set her pen down. "Isadora," she said, "good morning, my dear. Is everything all right?" "Yes, ma'am." "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. Speak freely," Vivian replied. A brief pause, and then, "Ma'am, I want to be honest with you, because you were honest with me, and I think you deserve the same." Another breath. "I want to respectfully withdraw from any consideration for meeting your son." The line was quiet for a moment. Vivian's expression did not change. "Tell me why," she said simply. "Because I have feelings for someone else," Isadora said. Her voice was steady and clear, but Vivian, who could read the emotional architecture of a sentence better than most people read full paragraphs, heard the quiet courage it had taken to dial this number and say exactly those words. "His name is Dante. He works as a cleaner in the building. And I know how that sounds, ma'am. I know what people would say, but I'm not interested in what people would say. I care about who he is. And who he is the most genuine, steady, decent person I have met in a very long time." Vivian was silent for one long moment. And then she said, in a voice that gave absolutely nothing away, "I appreciate your honesty, Isadora. Truly, I would like you to come to my home this Saturday at 11. There is something I need to share with you." A small pause from Isadora's end. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be there. And please, bring nothing but yourself," Vivian said. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." The call ended. Vivian set the phone face down on the desk, and then she sat very still for a moment. And then she did something she very rarely allowed herself to do in her office. She smiled. Wide, warm, and entirely private. Because her son had gone into that building looking for something real, and in 10 days, in a faded uniform with a mop in his hand, he had found it. She picked up her phone again and sent 2 messages. One to Sergio, one to Dante. Both said the same thing. Saturday, 11 o'clock. The house. It is time. Then she sent 2 more messages. One to Xiomara Reyes, and one to Lorenza Abate. Both of them said, "Good morning. Please come to my home this Saturday at 11. There is something important I would like to discuss." And on the other side of those 2 messages, in 2 separate parts of Houston, 2 women read those words and felt the same thing for entirely different reasons. Xiomara read hers while standing at her bathroom mirror in a silk robe, eyelash curler in hand. She set the curler down slowly. Her heart rate picked up. She had been waiting. For weeks. In the patient, coiled spring way of someone who has convinced themselves the reward is coming. And this was it. This was the call. She was sure of it. She spent the rest of that evening deciding what to wear, trying on 4 different outfits and discarding 3, and going to sleep with the quiet, certain smile of a woman who believed she had already won. Lorenza read hers while sitting cross-legged on her living room couch with her laptop open and a half-eaten bowl of fruit beside her. She read it twice, then she set the phone down very deliberately and stared at the wall for a long moment. Because unlike Xiomara, Lorenza did not feel certain. She felt cautious. She felt like a woman standing in front of a door that might open onto exactly what she wanted, or might open onto something she was not prepared for. And Lorenza Abate, who was almost never unprepared for anything, did not like that feeling at all. Saturday morning arrived clear and warm over River Oaks, the kind of Houston morning that felt like the city was making an effort. Isadora arrived first, at 10:58, wearing a simple deep green wrap dress and low heels, her natural coils pinned back softly from her face. She carried nothing except her bag. She rang the bell and Vivienne's housekeeper showed her into the sitting room. Wide and warm and quietly expensive, with tall windows and a cream couch and a low coffee table with a vase of white flowers in the center. She sat down and waited. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her back was straight, and her heart was doing something busy behind her ribs that she was actively working to ignore. And then she heard footsteps coming down the hallway, and then the sitting room door opened. And Dante walked in, but not the Dante she knew. Not the faded uniform, not the rubber-soled shoes, not the face cap. This Dante wore a fitted dark navy shirt that sat perfectly across those broad, muscled shoulders, clean dark trousers with a sharp crease, and shoes that looked like they had been made specifically for his feet by someone in another country who cared deeply about leather quality. His low fade was freshly shaped, his 5 o'clock shadow precisely lined along his jaw, and he moved through that doorway with the completely natural, unhurried authority of a man who was walking through his own house, because he was, in fact, walking through his own house. Isadora stood up. She looked at him, and then she looked at Vivienne, who had appeared in the doorway behind him. And then she looked back at Dante, and the pieces, all the small, confusing, slightly off pieces she had been quietly collecting for 10 days without knowing what they added up to, rearranged themselves in the space of about 4 seconds into a picture that was so clear and so enormous that she actually pressed one hand lightly against her sternum. "Isadora," Dante said. His voice was the same. That same, low, steady, completely recognizable voice. "I owe you an explanation." "You," she started, then stopped, then started again. "You are her son." "My name is Dante Emiliano Williams," he said carefully, watching her face. "I am Vivienne Williams' only son, and I have been in that building for 10 days as a cleaner, because I needed to see who people truly were before I walked in as anyone's heir. And I know that sounds unbelievable," Isadora said. Not with anger, with genuine, wide-eyed, completely stunned disbelief. "I know," he said. "You mopped floors," she said. "I did," he replied. "I brought you water," she said, and her voice cracked very slightly on the last word. Not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming rush of realizing that every single thing she had felt in that building over 10 days had been real on both sides simultaneously, without either of them knowing the full picture. "You did," Dante said, "and I didn't deserve it. Not because I was a cleaner, but because I was keeping something from you that I should have." "Dante." Vivienne's voice came from the doorway, quiet and firm. He stopped. "Let her breathe," Vivienne said simply. Isadora sat back down slowly. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and looked at the carpet for a moment. And then she looked up at Vivienne, and in a voice that was quieter than usual but no less certain, she said, "Ma'am, I told you on the phone that I had feelings for the cleaner. I want you to know, knowing who he actually is does not change what I told you, because what I felt was for the man who worked beside me in that building. Not the name. Not the company. Him." Vivienne looked at Isadora Voss, this young woman in her simple green dress with her hands flat on her thighs and her voice completely steady, even while her whole world was rearranging itself, and she thought, yes. "This one." "I know," Vivienne said softly. "That is exactly why I called you first." But then, the doorbell rang, and the sitting room shifted, because outside, in the driveway, a car had just pulled up, and out of it stepped Xiomara Reyes, in her most intentional outfit of the year, moving toward the front door with the confident stride of a woman who had no idea that the ground she was walking on had already been rearranged completely beneath her feet. Estelle, who had come to assist for the morning, opened the door and showed her in. Xiomara stepped into the sitting room with her signature entrance energy. Chin up, shoulders back, smile assembled and ready, and then stopped. Because sitting on the cream couch, with Vivian standing calmly to one side, was Isadora. And standing in the center of the room, in a fitted navy shirt with his low fade sharp and his jaw clean, and those dark, deep-set, entirely familiar eyes watching her with the same unbothered calm that had confused her every single time, was the cleaner. Xiomara's entrance energy dissolved instantly. It didn't fade gradually. It simply stopped, like a signal cut off mid-broadcast. She looked at Dante. She looked at his clothes. She looked at Vivian. And somewhere deep in the quick, calculating part of her brain that was always running quietly behind the performance, the connections began assembling themselves with horrible speed. "Good morning, Xiomara," Vivian said pleasantly. "Please sit down." Xiomara sat slowly, like someone who had lost feeling in their legs but was managing the situation through sheer will. The doorbell rang again, and Lorenza came in 2 minutes later, precisely dressed, precisely composed, moving into the sitting room with her characteristic controlled grace. And she did what Xiomara had done. She saw Dante, she read the room in about 3 seconds, and she stopped moving. But unlike Xiomara, who had gone pale and rigid, Lorenza went very, very still in the particular way of someone whose mind was working extremely fast behind a completely motionless face. Then Vivian spoke, and every word she said landed in that sitting room like something structural being removed from a building, quietly, but with consequences for everything attached to it. "My son has been working in this company for the last 10 days as a member of the cleaning team," she said. She did not raise her voice. She never needed to. He did so because he wanted to see who you truly were, not who you became when you knew his name and his position. The test was not about beauty or education or presentation. It was about character. And character, as I have said many times, is not what you show when important people are watching. It is what you do when you believe no one who matters is paying attention. The room was very quiet. Vivian turned to Xiomara first. "Now here's the thing, and I want you to really hear this part, because this is where the whole story turns." Xiomara Reyes had spent weeks carefully constructing a version of herself that she believed was exactly what this moment required. She had dressed for it, performed for it, planned for it, but none of that preparation had included the possibility that the man she needed to impress had already been standing right in front of her, and she had pointed at his work and called it pathetic. "Xiomara," Vivian said, "do you remember the morning in the reception area, your first week, when a new cleaner warned you the floor was wet?" Xiomara's jaw tightened. She said nothing. "You walked through his clean floor without breaking stride," Vivian said, "and when he reminded you gently, you implied that his schedule was incompetent." She paused. "Do you remember the corridor outside the marketing department?" The juice, whatever was left of Xiomara's composure, began to come apart at the edges. "And the intern Ko," Vivian said, "when the files fell and the tea spilled, an accident by any reasonable measure, you told him to get out of your sight." "Ma'am," Xiomara started. "I'm not finished," Vivian said, gently, but entirely without room for interruption. "You also spent 2 weeks pursuing my operations manager because you believed he represented access to money and power. You brought him coffee, Xiomara. You complimented his tie for 4 consecutive days. Florencia, who had not been invited and was therefore not present, would have been deeply grateful for that fact at this particular moment." Xiomara looked at Dante, and in his face she saw nothing hostile. No satisfaction, no cruelty, no revenge. Just the same quiet, settled calm that had looked up at her from behind a mop the morning she had called him a clumsy fool in a hallway full of people, which, somehow, was worse than anger would have been. "Dante," she said. Her voice had completely changed. The performance was gone. What was left was something much smaller and much more real. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Dante replied evenly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am genuinely." "Xiomara," he said, "the problem is not that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you believed how you treated me was acceptable because you thought I couldn't do anything about it. And a person who is kind only to people who have power over them is not kind at all." Xiomara's eyes went wet. Her lip pressed together. She looked at the carpet, and in that moment, every single grand vision she had constructed, the corner office, the company car, the staff greeting her by a new name, went completely and permanently quiet. Dante turned to Lorenza, and here, the atmosphere in the room shifted again, because Lorenza Abate did not look devastated the way Xiomara looked devastated. She looked prepared, which was, in its own way, the most telling thing about her. "Lorenza," Dante said, "you never insulted me. You never raised your voice. You were always composed and always appropriate when other people were present. He paused. But on my third day, when those managers passed and you gave me a warm compliment in front of them, and then told me to move my bucket the moment they turned the corner, you showed me two different people inside 1 minute. And I paid attention. Lorenza's jaw moved slightly, but she said nothing. You came to me twice and tried to make me believe that Isadora's kindness was a strategy, Dante continued. Not because you believed it, but because you were afraid of it. You kept asking Sergio about my arrival. You went to the staff kitchen and asked Isadora directly. You were gathering information and managing angles and calculating positions, not because you wanted me, but because you wanted what I represented. He looked at her steadily. Your performance was more sophisticated than Giomara's, but a more sophisticated performance is still a performance. Lorenza held his gaze for a long moment, and then, very quietly, she said, I understand. Not an apology, not tears. Just those two words, precise and contained, which told Dante everything about who Lorenza Abate was, even in the moment of being exposed. She would not fall apart, because she had already decided what the most dignified exit from this situation looked like, and she was already executing it. Vivian looked at both women for a long, quiet moment. You may leave, she said, not coldly, but finally. Xiomara stood slowly. She looked once more at Dante, and then at Isadora, and something crossed her face. Not quite acceptance, not quite peace, but the beginning of something that might, given significant time and significant humbling, grow into one or both of those things. She walked to the door without another word. Lorenza followed. She paused at the doorway and turned back once, and the look she gave Dante was unreadable, composed, careful, and entirely closed. Then she left. The door clicked shut, and then the sitting room was quiet. Just three people, Vivian, Dante, and Isadora, who had sat through the entire exchange with her hands folded and her expression moving through things she would probably need several days to fully process. Dante crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch. Close, not reaching for her hand, just close, in the way of someone who wanted to be near a person without demanding anything from them in return. I should have told you, he said. Yes, Isadora replied. You should have. I'm sorry, he said. She was quiet for a moment, and then, slowly, she turned and looked at him. Those steady almond eyes, that soft, evaluating, entirely honest gaze, and said, You were looking for something real. I understand that. A small pause. I just need you to know going forward that I don't do pretend. About anything. I'm not built for it. I know, Dante said. That is exactly why I'm sitting here. Vivian watched the two of them from her chair. And then she stood quietly and walked to the window, giving them the room without making a production of it, and looked out at the bright Saturday morning over River Oaks, and felt the particular peace of a woman who has fought very hard for a very long time, and is watching, at last, the right thing fall into the right place. The following Monday morning at 10 o'clock, the staff of Williams Property Group gathered in the main conference room for the second time in 2 weeks. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was more shifting in seats, more sideways glances, more of the specific, electric restlessness that fills a room when people know something significant is about to happen but don't yet know the shape of it. They didn't have to wait long. Vivian entered first, then Sergio, precise and composed as always, and then Dante, dressed in a clean, well-fitted charcoal suit, his fade freshly shaped, his 5 o'clock shadow immaculate along his jaw, walking through that conference room door with the same unhurried, settled pace that had moved through every corridor of this building for the past 10 days. Just without the bucket. The recognition hit the room in waves. Someone near the back said very quietly, That's the cleaner, someone else whispered, and then someone else, No, that cannot be. Dante stood at the front of the room beside his mother. He looked out at the faces watching him, some stunned, some confused, some already running through their own memories of the last 10 days, trying to remember every interaction, every word, every moment they had walked past him in a corridor without looking down. Vivian spoke first. My son has been among you, she said simply. And now he is here as himself. Dante Emiliano Williams, the next leader of this company. The room stayed quiet long enough for the weight of it to fully settle. And then Dante spoke. If you are enjoying this story right now, and I can feel through this screen that some of you absolutely are, this is the moment. Stop, hit that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment right now telling us what you thought of Xiomara and Lorenza getting exactly what they deserved. Because the comments on this story have been everything, and we read every single one of them. We see you. Now let's finish this. I came into this building carrying a mop, Dante said, his voice even and clear and carrying easily to every corner of the room. Not as a joke, not as entertainment, but because I wanted to understand something real before I stood in front of you with a title. I wanted to know how the people in this company behave when they believe nobody important is watching. He paused. And what I found, some of it surprised me, some of it disappointed me, and some of it, he said, and his gaze moved briefly and deliberately to Isadora where she sat among the staff, restored something I didn't know I had been missing. He looked back at the room. This company was built by a woman who never once forgot that every person in this building, from the cleanest office to the lowest corridor, is here because they matter. And from today, that principle is not just a value we mention in orientation documents. It is policy. It is practice. It is the standard by which every person in a leadership position in this building will be assessed. He straightened. Salary reviews for cleaning staff, security teams, interns, and junior employees begin this week. Welfare provisions, rest areas, and uniform allocations will be updated before the end of the month. And any person, regardless of title, who is found treating a lower-ranked colleague with contempt will face formal disciplinary review. The room was very still, but it was not a scared stillness. It was the particular, quiet, slightly overwhelmed stillness of people hearing something they had not expected to hear and finding that it moved them. In the back row, one of the senior cleaners, a woman named Mama Rosie who had worked in that building for 11 years and had been walked past by more staff members than she had ever counted, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Because she was not going to cry in a Monday morning company meeting. She was simply not. But it was a near thing. Dante looked out at the room one more time and said, "I look forward to leading alongside all of you. The door to my office is open." That is not a phrase. It is a promise. The applause started slowly and built quickly. And somewhere in the middle of it, in the third row, Isadora Voss pressed her hands together and looked down at them for a moment. Not performing emotion, just holding it quietly, the way she held everything. In the weeks that followed, Williams Property Group shifted in the quiet, meaningful way that real change shifts. Not with dramatic announcements, but with small, consistent, daily evidence that something had fundamentally changed at the top and was working its way down through every floor. Staff members who had spent years making themselves invisible in corridors started meeting Dante's eyes when he passed and finding, to their collective surprise, that he always nodded first. The cleaning team got new uniforms. The staff rest area on the ground floor was refurbished. And the Monday morning energy in the building, that specific, compressed, defensive energy of people preparing to survive another week, softened into something slightly more like a place where people actually wanted to be. Xiomara had submitted her resignation 11 days after the Saturday meeting. She sent it by email at 6:45 in the morning before most people arrived. There was no dramatic exit, no public confrontation, no final performance. She cleared her desk quietly on a Wednesday afternoon and walked out of the building through the same glass doors she had entered every morning for 3 years as if she owned the lobby. And nobody who passed her in that lobby knew, from looking at her, that she was not coming back. She was too proud for tears in public. But the woman who got into that car was visibly smaller than the one who had walked in. Lorenza remained. She continued to come to work, continued to be composed, and continued to do her job with quiet efficiency. But something had changed in how the building related to her. Not openly, not cruelly, but in the particular way of a place where people had seen something private about a person and could not entirely unknow it. Sergio gave her no further access to sensitive discussions. Vivian moved her role away from anything that touched strategic planning or senior communications. Lorenza accepted both adjustments without comment, which, I guess, said everything about the kind of woman she was. She would adapt, recalculate, and reposition. She always would. The question of what she was repositioning toward was one that nobody had fully answered yet. And Isadora remained entirely herself, because she had never been anything else. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the Saturday meeting, Dante found her in the accounts office long after most of the floor had emptied. She was at her desk with a spreadsheet open and a cold cup of tea beside her keyboard, which told him everything he needed to know about how long she had been sitting there. He set a fresh cup on her desk without a word. She looked up at him, and the look on her face, tired, warm, completely unguarded, quietly happy, settled into his chest in the precise, permanent way of things that are going to matter for a very long time. "You know," she said, wrapping her hands around the cup, "when I told you I liked you in that rainy corridor, I thought I was confessing something slightly embarrassing about a cleaner. And now?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her desk. "Now," she said, tilting her head slightly, "I realize I was confessing something slightly embarrassing about a billionaire, which is somehow worse for my composure." He laughed. That real one. The full, face-changing laugh that she had learned by now was entirely reserved for moments he wasn't managing his expression. And Isadora smiled at him across her desk in an empty office on a Thursday evening, with a fresh cup of tea and a spreadsheet full of numbers, and the Houston skyline glowing outside the window behind him, and thought, This is what I meant by real. And now, here is what this story, underneath all the drama and the corporate maneuvering and the mops and the juice and the sitting room confrontations, was actually about. It was about the way the world teaches people to sort other people. By title, by salary, by clothing and posture and the floor their office sits on. It was about how easily that sorting becomes a habit so deep that it starts to feel like truth, like the cleaner and the manager are genuinely different categories of human being, rather than simply two people who happen to stand in different places in the same building. Dante Williams put on a faded uniform and pushed a mop through those corridors for 10 days. And in those 10 days, people showed him exactly who they were. Not who they said they were in their CVs or their interviews or their performance reviews, who they actually were in the small, unobserved moments between important events. In how they spoke when nobody who mattered was listening. In whether they waited for a floor to dry before they walked on it. Xiomara lost everything she was chasing because she never once considered that what she was stepping over might be worth stepping around instead. Lorenza almost got away with it. Almost, because she was smart enough to know that presentation matters. But presentation without substance is just a very convincing delay. Eventually, the two things have to match. And when they don't, the gap becomes visible to the right people at the right moment. And Isadora? Isadora just was who she was. Every day. In every corridor, regardless of audience. And in a building full of people performing for the right eyes, the most radical thing she did was simply refuse to perform at all. That was the thing Dante Williams had gone looking for. And that was the thing he found. Not because he went looking in the right place, but because he went looking in the right way. So if there is a lesson underneath all of this, and I believe there is, it is this. The person worth building with is not the one who rises to the occasion when the occasion is grand and visible and well attended. It is the one who is already standing in the right place long before anyone calls the occasion by name. Be an Isadora, in every room, in every corridor, especially the empty ones. But then, just as the city outside that window settled into its Thursday evening rhythm, just as Dante reached across the desk and tucked one of Isadora's loose coils gently back behind her ear, just as everything in that office felt like the beginning of something that was finally going to be allowed to breathe, his phone vibrated. He glanced at it, Sergio's name on the screen, which was not unusual, but the message beneath it. He went still. Dante, come to the building. Tonight, something has come up. It concerns the company, and it cannot wait until morning. Dante looked at the message for a long, quiet moment. Then he looked up at Isadora, who was watching his face with the perceptive steadiness of someone who had learned to read the small shifts in a person's expression before they turned into words. What is it? She asked. I don't know yet, he said. Which was true, but the stillness in his voice, the kind of stillness that came not from calm but from control, told her that whatever it was serious. He stood, straightened his jacket, and was halfway to the door when his phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from the building's reception desk, an after-hours visitor log that Sergio had apparently already approved. Dante stopped walking. He looked at the name on the visitor entry. He read it once, and then he read it again, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment, the slight tightening of the jaw, the almost imperceptible stilling of his whole body, was the expression of a man who had just seen something he genuinely had not prepared for. He turned back to look at Isadora once. Just once, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it behind those dark, deep-set, steady eyes, and gave her nothing but a quiet, I'll explain later. Then he walked out, and in the lobby of Williams Property Group, on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in the Galleria district, a woman sat in one of the visitor chairs, with her legs crossed and her hands folded in her lap and her spine perfectly straight. She was dressed in European clothes, simple, expensive, precise. Her hair was dark and pulled back. Her face was calm and entirely composed. And when the elevator doors opened and Dante Williams stepped out, she looked up, and she said, in accented English that carried the unmistakable shape of 4 years in the same Italian city where Dante had spent the defining years of his adult life, Hello, Dante. I think you know why I am here. He stood in that lobby, and he looked at her, and for the first time in this entire story, for the first time since he had walked into this building in a faded uniform with a mop in his hand and an entire empire in his bloodline, Dante Emiliano Williams had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next.